you're tired of filet de boeuf en croûte and champignons sous cloche and poulet sauté meringue, and you just want to get away from all that caviar and grouse in an overheated house, how about lentils today on the French Chef?
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. We're going to do lentils today, 3 ways. We're going to do them as a soup and as a vegetable and as a main course. And you know that lentils are one of the very oldest vegetables known to man. They date way back to the Bronze Age, if not before. And this is a lentil. You probably have more than one, and that's the way they come. And they're described botanically. A lentil is a small annual of the vetch family. That's a very botanical sounding thing, but I want to show you a picture of it. And that's the plant. It's just a little plant. It's 8 to 10 inches high, and it has a little pod. And each pod has either 1 to 2 lentils, and that's all. And a lentil is called a pulse, and anything that is in a pod is a pulse. And a pulse is a leguminous plant, and a leguminous plant is any vegetable that has a pod, like a lentil. So there you are, back again to lentils. And when you get lentils, there are quite a number of varieties, but the ones that you mostly see are this kind of grayish, brownish, rusty kind, or the red kind. And this red kind are called the lentils of Egypt. And this is, you remember when Esau sold his birthright for a mess of pottage, it was a dish of red lentils that he sold it for. And the red lentils are best for soup because they come apart rather easily when you cook them. And always when you see a recipe for dried vegetables, it says, pick over the lentils, and that means that you look at them all very quickly, because you might find a little stone, or you might find, say, the eye of a needle, or something like that in them. Modern lentils rarely have anything like that, so that in the old days, you certainly did have to pick them over, because if you bit into a stone, you might break a piece off your tooth. And then, after you've picked them over, you wash them. And the washing is just because they might be dusty. And to do that, you just run the water in, and then swish them up a little bit with your hands and dump them into a sieve, and then they're ready to cook. And with the modern lentil, you don't have to soak it, although quite a few recipes still say they haven't caught up with the modern lentil, that you do have to soak them. You do not, because we called up the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they said no soaking, because you've got a new kind of lentil that's much smaller and tenderer and has, I don't know what else it has, but anyway, they don't have to be soaked, which I think is very useful to know. And the easiest lentil recipe is soup, so we'll start out with that. And we're going to have 2 pieces of celery. We start out with our usual aromatic vegetables, and they can be chopped very roughly, and 1 carrot, and an onion, and if you have a leek, you can chop up a leek too. And these are the vegetables that are going to give flavor to the soup. And there's a leek. You remember what a leek is, part of the onion family. You just cut that in half and then just roughly chop. And also a bit of garlic. And the garlic you don't even need to peel. You can just chop it in half. As you can see, this is very much the easiest thing to do because the vegetables don't have to be fancily done. There they are in a little plate. And you cook the vegetables in 2 tablespoons of oil until they're very tender and lightly brown, just like that. And we're always using aromatic vegetables. It seems to me we've had them in every recipe except cake. And I want 3 tablespoons of flour, and that's just about 3 tablespoons. And that, although they don't use flour in the old recipes, I find it with the modern lentil, it is better to use it because I don't think the modern lentil has quite as much body as probably the old one did. And we're going to have 6 cups of liquid and 1 cup of lentils. And the liquid can be ham stock, if you've just boiled a ham, or turkey stock or duck stock. And I'm putting in half of these lentils because 1 package of lentils is 1 pound, and that's about 2 cups, so 1 cup is half a pound. And they swell 3 times, so 1 cup of lentils after it's cooked is going to make 3 cups. And then this should boil, this can just boil as it is for about an hour and a half. In the old days, they used to boil for 3 hours, but because you don't have to do the soaking and it just cooks faster, an hour and a half is enough. And then this, you want to taste how, depending on what kind of a soup stock you have, you want to taste how it is, and then see whether it needs anything else. That has enough salt in it because my ham had enough salt, but I didn't put much flavoring in, so I'm going to put in a bay leaf and a little bit of thyme. And then that's just going to cook. And also, because the lentils have a very nice flavor all by themselves, you'll be amazed if you haven't cooked them before how they really have a rather meaty flavor. So you could just use water if you didn't have any stock, or you could add some chicken stock, but even that wouldn't be terribly necessary because you have your aromatic vegetables. And you can add other kinds of flavoring. And Carême, the famous French chef, I'll give you what he had in his recipe. Here's his book. He died in 1833 at the age of 49, which was a terrible thing. But he has a carrot, an onion, 2 leeks, a big celery, some blanched ham, a turnip, and a partridge. This is a partridge. He didn't say in his book whether the partridge should be stuffed or not, so that I think I shall use a sausage. And this is just a plain cooking sausage, and that you would put in half an hour before the end of the cooking. Let's say that that's cooked for an hour. And the turnip, this is a big piece of rutabaga, but I took some the other day and found that the rutabaga was a little bit too strong. I mean, too much was too strong, so I'm just going to put in a little bit of it there, because a little tiny bit of turnip flavor is very nice. And there's certainly, I mean, that's really all you need to do, and I can see that why potage purée de lentil, as it is called in France, has been such a famous soup for so long, just because it's very simple to do. And this, you can cook it covered, which I think is probably a good idea, because that would keep the liquid from reducing too much. And then after it's done, you could serve it without pureeing, but it would be rather peasanty. And it's much better to serve it pureed, I think, because, well, it's just more attractive that way. And after the soup is cooked, you simply puree it through a food mill, and it's very thick. at this point, if you could serve it just as a pureed vegetable. But then here, after you've drained it off, there is the rest of the liquid. And this is why I think that it's a good idea to add a little flour in it, because this liquid then is thickened up. And if it's still too thick, as I think it is now, you could add a little more liquid and then season it very carefully. We'll have a taste of it and see how it is. It's tremendously good. I don't wonder it's been such a popular soup for so long. And then here is the sausage, if you want to put the sausage in. It's been cooked and sliced. And this really makes a main course soup. This, of course, you can do ahead and then reheat. And if you had any leftover game or leftover ham, you could put bits of ham in. It's just a fine soup. Now, we've finished with the soup, so we're going to do it as a vegetable. And it's absolutely delicious as a vegetable, and I'm going to make it quite plain. It's really going to be buttered lentils, maître d'hôtel. And lentils are served in France a great deal with game like wild duck and pheasant and partridge. And you can serve them either as a puree or as a whole vegetable. And the problem with the lentil is to keep it whole. And again, you have this problem again with a quicker cooking modern lentil. When it's cooked, you want it to look whole just like that. And this means very careful cooking. And a great deal of quite a few of the recipes, again, who haven't caught up to the modern lentil, tell you that you should boil or simmer them. But I found that if you do, they just aren't going to stay together, and that you're much better off by cooking them very, very slowly, really at the shiver. And again, now we have 1 cup of water in here, 1 cup of lentils, so we want 3 times the amount of water. And I'm putting in some, seems to be dribbling a little bit. About 3 cups of water, a little bit more. And when you want them never to come up actually to the simmer. You just want what the French call frémir. It's not bubbling, so you regulate the heat very, very carefully so that it's just below the bubble. And then begin tasting them after about 20 or 30 minutes. I think after 20, and then they're usually done at about 25. But just be careful not to let them bubble. Now they are bubbling now, so I'm going to take it off the heat a little bit and just keep it like that. And it's surprising that you wouldn't think that in 25 minutes they would be tender, but they are. And I'm going to show you I've got a tremendous pot of ready lentils here. I'm just going to show you what they look like. And those are just tender there. And you don't put any salt in until, just the last few minutes. And then after to make sure that they're all right, you just take one and just taste it. And it should be just tender through. And this is a preliminary cooking that they go through, or some people call it a blanching. But it's just a very important thing if you want to keep the lentils whole, and I think it's very attractive if they are whole. Red lentils just seem to turn into mush. I've tried doing them this way, being very, very careful and even having below the simmer, but that doesn't seem to work very well. So, now I'm getting things ready. Now these lentils, as they are blanched, or the preliminary cooking, this is the first stage, and you can use them either as the vegetable or as the main course. And when you're going to use the main course, this is our very simple lentil dish, which is going to be called à la maître d'hôtel. You just drain them, and they go into a pan. And then they're going to be flavored just very, very simply with butter. They're going to be buttered lentils. So what you want to do is to dry them off a little bit in an empty pan. I mean, not an empty pan, a dry pan, so that you'll get rid of the excess liquid, and then you'll have nothing but butter and a little flavoring. And a little shallot would go nicely here. So I'm just going to mince up this shallot, and that'll go in. Just have to keep washing and shaking that around. This is a very French thing, I think, of drying off vegetables. They're always drying off spinach and potatoes before they put anything on, because they don't like to have things watery. And I think that's one of these little tricks that make French cooking so good. Now these will need a little bit of salt. I'll put in about half a teaspoon and then taste it. And some pepper. I don't seem to have any pepper, so I'll put in a little tiny bit of thyme. Turn that around. And then now, when they're dry enough, put in a little melted butter, about 2 or 3 tablespoons. And get used to this system of holding the pan by its handle and shaking it. As you see when you shake it, going a little bit going over the stove, but not too many. But if you have a pan that's properly designed, you can shake it, and it's made so that you can do this, and they won't go over, they won't shake out too much. There's a little bit, I'll take them off. And now when those are done, be sure that you taste them and see what they need. Really awfully good. I'm always saying that when I don't cook anything that I don't like. And then just before you are ready to serve them, put in some parsley. And then they go into a serving dish. And these are lovely with, I don't seem to have done that with great dispatch. Well, that makes a delicious dish with game and with turkey and with pork and with lamb, and or really just by itself. I think in France they will often serve lentils with eggs. And put that over there. Now lentils is soup and lentils is vegetable, and now we're going to have lentils as main course. But amazingly enough, lentils are just full of protein. They have more protein than meat. And if you take lean beef and put it in one corner, and you take lentils and put them in another corner, ounce for ounce, lentils win all the way except in one item, which is niacin. And here's a little list, which I think is very interesting. For ounce for lentil versus beef, lentils have more protein, 4 times more calcium, more phosphorus, twice as much iron, more vitamin A, 6 times more thiamine, more riboflavin. Beef doesn't have any ascorbic acid at all. Unfortunately, lentils have twice the calories, but they're only 1/4 of the price. So I think probably adding meat to lentils is an act of supererogation. But we're going to do it anyway because it makes a wonderful, a kind of a cassoulet, and it's certainly much easier than the traditional cassoulet. And very easy to do, and you can put most any kind of meat that you would like in it. First, I'm going to put, these are our blanched lentils, and they go into a buttered baking dish, nicely drained. And then we want to make sauce or flavoring for the lentils. And the meat here, I have this brown meat, and this is going to go over the lentils. And this is, you can use browned lamb shanks or lamb, braised lamb shoulder. This happens to be a combination of sausages and pork and ham that has just been nicely browned. And I'm going to now make the sauce, which will flavor that up. And we have again our friendly aromatic vegetables. In this case, this is a mirepoix. This is the same vegetables that we had before, but cut into very fine dice, which is called a mirepoix. And I'm going to put in about 3 tablespoons of flour and let that cook. That should cook about 2 minutes. That's always, when flour goes into things, you want to let it cook so that you get rid of the pasty taste of the flour. And then we're going to have some red wine. And this will be about half a cup. That'll give a little more interest to the lentils wine, and then some stock. This could be canned. This could be canned bouillon. In this case, this is a little bit of ham stock, the same that I used before. Then you want to be sure that you taste that. And it'll taste simply awful at this point because the wine isn't cooked. You know, wine always has to be cooked and reduced by at least half or it just tastes simply terrible. It's a flavoring. It's not used because of its alcohol. I just want to see if there's enough salt in things. Well, I think that'll be all right after it finally cooks. But this you want to cook so it'll thicken enough. One thing, if you get a little too much liquid in, you can always cook it down until the sauce is thickened, which I'm now doing. Then when you feel that's just about the right consistency, this is the kind of recipe where you don't have to give tremendously detailed amounts. And that sauce has gone onto the lentils. And see, these were having just been blanched. They have not had any other flavoring. And then on the meat goes. And the meat has been nicely browned, and it's just all really just about cooked through, and it just needs a little bit more blending and melding of flavors. But what I think is very nice about lentils is that they're wonderfully inexpensive, and they're wonderfully nourishing, and then you can use fairly inexpensive things like, you know, those Polish sausages that you find in your grocery counter. Now this should have a little more, I'm going to put a little more chopped shallot on that. If you wanted to, you could put some more parsley or herbs on. And this meat didn't have very much flavoring on it, so I'm going to put a little tiny sprinkling of thyme on it. And then on go some breadcrumbs. Duck or goose cut up. You could use cut up frozen turkey legs that had been browned and braised in wine. That would be very good too. And now you want to put a little bit of the juices from the pan, a little bit of the fat from the pan on over the breadcrumbs. The nice thing about this dish also, you can do it way ahead. You can do this the day before you were going to serve it and put it in the refrigerator. all ready, so all you needed to do was to pop it into the oven. Clean things up. So that looks very nice as it is, and all it needs is just to go into the oven whenever you're ready to cook it. And it takes about, I should say about 40 minutes in a 375-degree oven. And you want it to bubble up nicely. And you want to be sure that the sauce is nice and thick. So here we have one that's already done and ready to serve. Nicely bubbly. There. And this is when you have lentils, lentils this way in a dish. It is called les lentilles garnies, which is just like choucroute garni. I'm going to take this in so you can see how it looks. There. And before I serve the lentils, I want to serve you the soup so that you can see how that looks. And this one, I haven't put I'm going to start, rather than sausages, I have a little herb butter with some shallots and parsley, which I'm putting in the bottom of the soup bowl. And here is your nice soup, nice and hot. And that goes in. And then stir that up so that you get the herb butter all through. And some croutons on top. And that makes a very, very attractive soup. Now let's see how the main course looks when it's being served. And this is a very hearty main course because you've got all the protein from the lentils and all the protein from the meat, and it's every bit as good as a cassoulet, I think. And with it, I would serve a nice hearty wine like a Beaujolais or a Côte du Rhône, and all you'd need to go with this would be a green salad. And you've just got really a perfect meal and the kind people adore to eat. As I sit here over my plate of lentils, I like to think of my ancestor, the Cro-Magnon man, in his cave, grunting over a bowl of pulse, and Esau with his mess of pottage. You know, people are always searching for the missing link, but here it is, the lentil. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.